Hello. It's my and our pleasure to have a session on creativity in the arts with a computational aspect. Part of the inquiry is to see how the arts are changing now that we can have AI agents involved. The structure of the next 90 or so minutes is that after I finish this agenda for 3 minutes, each of us will describe for 10 minutes some aspect, something that we are working on. And we have 3 honest-to-goodness artists. I have been working with somebody else, but I wouldn't count myself as an artist. Then there'll be a moderated panel with questions that have been prepared for the speakers. And we are collecting questions from you, and then we'll have audience participation from those submitted questions. The participants are Valentina Nisi, who is in engineering and at University of Madeira. She's keen on interactive storytelling and is going to present some of her work that will show you what that means. Brian McGurko from the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. He does AI-based interactive installations, computational creativity. Gil Weinberg, also at Georgia Tech in the College of Design, doing robotic musicianship. And my name is David Kirsch, and I do a bunch of things, but for the last 4 years I've been in architecture school at the Bartlett School at University College London, and before that 7 years in working with the choreographer of the Royal Ballet. All right, so it's my 10 minutes. I'm going to talk about creativity as problem solving in choreography, and I'm going to pose it in a manner which I hope will be constructive for the others to look at and consider whether that applies to their domain as well. So here are dancers looking for movement phrase ideas. They're not dancing full out here, they're marking, and they're trying to find some useful phrases. The reason I know something about this is that, as I mentioned a second ago, I collaborated with a choreographer of the Royal Ballet for 7 years. I used to study his work each year for 6 or 8 weeks with many, many video cameras. And his private company is called Random Dance, and that's the one I worked with. So as a reminder, I'm going to now make a slight version of problem solving and distinguish 2 kinds of problem solving. One kind of problem solving is the generative search, the one everybody is familiar with, and that's search in a problem space. It presupposes a graph structure, and it involves classifying situations, which we could use deep learning for. It involves generating candidate actions from each of those nodes or those states, which we could use deep learning for. And then there's evaluation, which would be determining the goodness of those actions according to some set of criteria, which we could also use deep learning for. So it lends itself to deep learning, and particularly in the well-defined fields, you know how well they have been done. So that could also apply to music. It could also apply to dance. It could apply to a lot of fields. It does require a well-defined or nearly well-defined problem space, and the challenge in this case is not getting lost in the thousands or millions of alternatives, but rather generating smart candidates to consider. That's the big challenge. There's another kind of problem solving, which we might think of as non-search problem solving. And in the Euler's famous solution to the 7 bridges of Königsberg, which is the desire for the people in Prussia to cross one bridge, make a tour, go from the land, cross over each bridge exactly once, and come back. It was a long-standing question as to whether or not that could be done or whether it was impossible. To solve that problem, he invented graph theory. Great problem solving. No one would say that's not problem solving. So he radically re-represented the task. Radically. And he reframed it, he discovered it, he had a deep understanding. Another kind of problem solving that is not really search is an embodied kind of interaction where with your hand, say in whittling, you feel the grain of the wood. It's not search, you're trying to have a dialogue with the materials. And of course then there's algorithmic problem solving, which doesn't involve search at all. So we could say that in any creative task, we could plot, in principle, how much of each of that kind of problem solving is involved in the creative activity. In the case of choreography, I would say it's mostly technique for generating ideas. There is a little bit of reframing and a fair amount of embodied interaction. So let me tell you a bit about how choreographers do make new dances, most of them, I'm sure not all of them, and these are a bunch of techniques they have for coming up with good ideas. So here is Noah Gelber, and this is a standard choreographic problem. They would have been doing an exercise involving banquet furniture, and they're asked to visualize interacting with the banquet furniture and do interesting things with it. Now, the furniture very majorly constrains the kind of movements he's going to perform. Of course, you don't see the furniture, and as a result, his movements look interesting. That's one way choreographers create movements. And the dancer, of course, chooses the furniture, chooses how to work with it, and chooses their movements. Now, Bill Forsyth, here's an example of a very famous piece. It's called One Flat Thing. I'm going to just show you very briefly some elements of it. And you can see, wow, they're doing dancing on furniture. So here's the duet part, here's a quartet. This has been highly studied. It was one of his more successful, many successful, but one of his more successful. Here's a septet. So you can see they would have worked this out individually on different pieces of furniture and then in duets and trios on it. So here we have a case where, now coming back to my choreographer, Wayne McGregor, the way he makes a dance is he assigns a lot of choreographic tasks to his dancers, and each one comes up with a solution in a 57 to 61 minute period. They'll do a lot of this in the course of a day, many different tasks, and he's watching, and he may not really seriously look at what they've done for a few days, at which point they may have done 5 or 10 tasks, but then he'll have them show it to him, and he will select and modify that sort of thing and then work on it. So you could say, where's the creativity? Well, the creativity is in terms of the individual dancers solving those choreographic problems. There's creativity in terms of how the choreographer both selects and improves or adds to it. And there is creativity in the joint interaction because he doesn't just watch, he works with them too. So we have lots of places there could be creativity. So far, it does look like there's problem solving, though at several different levels. That's one trick with the choreo. Here's another trick for generating phrases. In this case, Wayne, the choreographer, he's just copied one of the dancers who did this kind of chicken thing. Now, this little flourish at the end, that was just because he liked the music. But the first thing he did was copy it. Now, every body is different and it has a kind of signature. So one way you can modify dance movement in order to get interesting properties is to run it through another body. And I have seen him on many occasions take a task that is a phrase that one person made and he has someone else do it. It's their phrase. They're doing it. And he sees how it's changed, tall bodies, thin bodies, never fat, but lots of different bodies. Here's another one. Another standard way is to break the bias in thinking by using randomness. So you can introduce randomness in many different ways. One method, the old methods without computational aid, was, for instance, to have a dancer dance with another dancer, and whether he or she had a strap here, they were supposed to imagine a strap, and when the one dancer is performing whatever movements they are, they're only supposed to track the strap, and they're supposed to interact with the strap. Now, the strap is moving around in very odd ways, unlike what the dancer is doing, because it's just this rather special geometric form. So that creates a lot of randomness. But he also has used on one of the dances a piece of software which he commissioned, was quite expensive, called Becoming, designed by Mark Downey. And in this piece of software, there was a display. it was a moving display doing all sorts of odd things, and you can see it's not just limbs, they're vague and fuzzy, and they move around. And meanwhile, the dancers have got these 3D glasses on, they're looking at it, and they're interacting with the display in some way, but not always. They could be moving off themselves after a while. The advantage of having one of those displays like that is that the avatar or the multiple things on screen move in unconstrained ways, that is unconstrained relative to a human, so there are no joint restrictions. They levitate, they move through the floor, limbs pass through limbs, and there are impossible sequences of movements. All of these are helpful methods for the dancers to go beyond what they ordinarily would imagine. So they wouldn't consider those things themselves, and they can't do them, but the act of looking at them, they serve as idea germs, because they can't be the real thing since they can't do it, but they give them a germ of an idea. So, choreography is about composing interesting ensembles of movement in space and musical contexts. The big goal, and one goal certainly, is to invent new movements. Wayne McGregor is always trying to have movements that have never been seen before, in fact, never been performed by a body before. So you can imagine what that does to bodies. And the problem space is not well defined, since those are completely new movements, ones you wouldn't consider ever. There are computational aids that help the dancers and choreographer find germs of ideas, but they don't display the actual usable forms. And there are other techniques like randomness or embodied transforms, running it through a body, that increase diversity of ideas. This is again on the generation side. It looks like it's kind of problem solving in a semi-defined problem space, but clearly they are bodies that move sometimes because of the way they're moving and the physical properties. For instance, one of the things in dance is to feel gravity and resistance, and if you're just about to fall over, that can't be predicted by any model. So there's a little bit like whittling, where this embodied movement, and that you're getting the ideas through what's happening. But meanwhile, there's still the concern of the choreography for integrity, artistic identity, coherence, and that makes the evaluation process very non-trivial. So that's what I want to say. So you can see in dance and choreography, it looks a lot like problem solving, but many aspects of problem solving. Gil is next. He's going to be very entertaining, I believe. Here.
Thank you for having me. I'm Gil Weinberg from Georgia Tech Center for Music Technology, where I have a group that is called Robotic Musicianship. We develop robots that are creative, or at least we try to develop robots that are creative, robots that will create interesting ideas that we as humans would not think about, ideas that will surprise us, ideas that will inspire us, with the goal of pushing the envelope of what music can be. And in order to look at creativity, robotic creativity, we look at human creativity. And today we know, you're probably the people who discovered this, that the brain is not the left-right dichotomy that we used to think about. And for example, in the process of listening to music or composing music or playing music, any engagement with music, the whole brain is shooting up. You have the auditory cortices, both ears, next to both ears, doing auditory processing. You have the frontal cortex doing anticipation, executive functions. Music is a lot about thinking what's coming next. The hippocampus, memory, you have to know the motifs that came and how they are variated. Amygdala, done to the core, in the center, emotions. Even the motor cortex is shooting, whether you're dancing or not, when you listen to music. So what we are trying to do is take it one step further and not just say that music is both analytical, used to be left side, thought about as left side, and creative, but we can actually use rationale and analytics and algorithms to give rise to creativity, to actually create creativity, or at least a perception of creativity. And we can talk about what's the difference between creativity and perception of creativity, maybe later in the panel. The way we are going about it is develop robots that listen like humans, but play like machines. Because we are working with a working definition of creativity. I know there are many, but the process of creating original idea that is meaningful for humans is the one that we are using. In music, you can say beautiful, creating original ideas that are beautiful. In design, it may be functional. I'm using the word meaningful. So in order to create something that is meaningful for humans, our robots has to understand music the same way humans do. They have to understand chord progression and tension and release and syncopation and all of the good things that we listen to, the high-level aspects. But in order to be creating original ideas, they have to be creative. They have to think like no human or play like no human can. And we are doing it with two ways. First, we're using algorithms that humans are not likely to use. Genetic algorithms, fractals, deep learning, but also mechanically. Our robots can create music that humans can't just because the ability that they have, anything from speed to virtuosity, and I'll show some examples. So this is the first robot. I'll show you a clip. His name is Hailey, and he can play drums. It listens to humans, and in real time, improvise based on what it listens to. In this case, it's using genetic algorithm. I don't have time to explain now, maybe in the panel, exactly what we are doing, but look at the face of the human musician that is playing with Hailey. Realizing, I believe, that there's something there that was similar to what he played, but also something that pushed him to a different direction. And this kind of faces is the kind of faces that we're looking for from subject when we develop our robots. So that's a motif. And Hailey responds. Now the robot is doing beat detection. And now it improvises with a small solenoid arm. So it took the pitch from one drummer and the rhythm from another, puts them together, and creates something very mathematical that a human drummer would probably not come up with. This is the second robot. His name is Shimon. Here we added multiple elements. One of them is the ability to play pitch and harmony. Also, a social head, because music is a lot about movement. And in order to listen like a human, it has to project that he understands and digs the music as much as you do. And here you see how it does a similar beat detection, but also uses gestures to show me that he detected the beat. Now he listens to the guitar playing, and it will start to play in the same beat, but it will modify, in this case, some fractal algorithms, modify the music from the guitar, and come up with its own motif. And now we are building on what the robot came up with. So first I will play it in a canon, the trumpet is adding, another column response that brings some personality from the robot with gestures. And here we use deep learning. We analyzed Monk, transcribed rhythm from Monk, from Coltrane, from Lady Gaga, from the Beatles, and we can control how much of each one of these styles is in the composition. This is using deep learning, and the data set is like 5,000 songs, and this is the first deep learning composed music by a robot that also use embodiment and gestures. This is a work by Mason Breton, my first PhD student from 3 years ago. I don't know if you hear Mozart and Lady Gaga here, but it's somewhere in there inside. Shimmy, I'll run quickly through Shimmy. It's a small version of Shimon that can actually understand music and understand language, and then it can play music and dance to it using analysis of the music. So it will detect a beat, it will know where's a chorus, where's a verse, and can also bring you music from your library.
Shimmy, look at me. Do you have Justin Bieber? Do you have hot chocolate? Let's hear it.
So everything is done in real time, the detection. Here it detects a beat from the user and will bring a song with a similar beat. I don't know if you recognize, but he had 100 songs in the library and he knew how to understand the beat from the user and play back. And here's both of them playing together. This is in Kennedy Center. They listen to my chord progression and the robot improvises, Shimmy dances. We use jazz reference books to teach the robot how to improvise over a chord progression. I will run quickly because I see time, so I will not talk about soul. But yes, that's one question that people ask me: will robots can have soul? This is what we like music about. If we have time, I'll talk about it in the questions. I also talk about will they take our jobs questions. These are the Luddites. If you want to ask me, I will talk about it. But the reason I'm rushing is because I want to show you some of our human augmentation work. This is Jason Barnes. He lost his arm. It was pretty devastated. He was a musician. Music was his life. He came to us to develop him a prosthetic arm. He probably Googled music and robots and found our robots. And we developed this robotic arm for him that is operated by EMG. Look at his face again. This is the first time that he tried it.
In this video, I demonstrate how I
works.
control the robotic drumming prosthesis using my forearm muscle. The EMG electrodes attached to my arm send very low latency signals to trigger the robotic stick when I contract my muscle. I can trigger a hit with every contraction, or toggle between different automatic drumming states.
So this is a robot that is under his control. But the second stick, we call it a stick with a mind of its own, and it improvises. So it's a new experience where your own body kind of improvises based on listening to the music and listen to other musicians. Here is Jason improvising with both sticks, trying to respond to the stick with a mind of its own while controlling the other. And after these performances, we have a heavy rock drummer emailing us. They will give anything to have. They will give an arm to have this kind of capabilities. Maybe not an arm, but the reason is that each stick can play 20 hertz. Each stick can play 20 hits per second, together 40 hits per second. No human can do that. We perform in multiple venues with both the arm and Shimon. So the arm, Shimon is listening to the arm is listening to Shimon, and they're both improvising. If we have time later, I can show some more videos. But the last video I want to show is Jason using deep learning over his muscle. We can understand with an ultrasound sensor what finger he's trying to move, because just flexing and relaxing, controlling a stick wasn't enough for him. And now we have machine learning creating a pianist who used to be a drummer before. Talking about machine learning or AI taking jobs. This is a guy that wouldn't have a job, and now he's composing, he's performing as a pianist, as a musician that not only got back what he lost, but actually pushed his abilities to uncharted domain, which is some of the goals that we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Thank you for being here in the last sessions. My background is in fine arts and screenwriting. I don't have the computation and the deep learning, beautiful work of Jill. I'm going to talk about kind of ways of using computation for storytelling, helping us to understand better how this world works. And this is the work of a big group of people at Madeira Institute of Technology. I just want to acknowledge the work of artists and researchers and developers on this. And the context is the archipelago of the Macaronesian Islands, which is a set of islands in the Atlantic Ocean. We are in Madeira Island, part of Portugal, in front of Morocco, but the rest of the islands are also sharing similar nature, capital, biodiversity, and sort of over-tourism issues. This is the context in which the idea was born. Islands have very fragile ecosystems. We also have some natural hazards, floods and fires due to the geological composition of the island, which is very steep, and the dry and hot wind from the desert, which can cause the forest to burn. And the over-tourism problem, which is common in several areas of Europe now. Beautiful places which enhance and suggest contemplation are now really flooded with people that want to see it, and they are supporting the local economies, but at the same time they could endanger the rich biodiversity of the island. So we came through the concept of transmedia storytelling, which is a story that is told through different platforms. It can entertain through participation, engagement, and interaction, and request the collaboration of the audience. Stories are and have always been a powerful force to help us understand the world, so combining these things together is what is our sort of creative effort. Our goals are to expose visitors to the rich local natural heritage and biodiversity, develop awareness about local traditions, and inspire empathy between locals and tourists. So the way this works in our transmedia story is fictional element, which is location-based. We created a character, Laura, which will go through a certain number of adversities, which each one of these adversities will be a plot point that exposes some local issues and biodiversity issues that are really particular of the island. The story is delivered through a mobile phone, which you will have in your hands, and will take you step by step through certain areas of the city of Funchal. The city of Funchal is very touristic. We have tried to highlight areas that are off the beaten track, also to help this over-tourism flow. On the other hand, after each plot point of the fictional story, which help us incorporate historic and scientific facts, there are connections to interviews with locals of the island, scientists and residents. So there is a bridge between the fiction and the past, and the present and the locals that are living today in the island. I'm going to show a short trailer to give you an idea of the work.
Fragments of Laura is a new and interactive way to explore the historical center of São Pedro in Funchal. Using our app, you'll have the chance to take part in a location-based transmedia experience, taking a tour of the city while following the story, interacting with the environment, and learning more about your surroundings. Follow Laura and her story to discover part of Madeira's natural heritage and biodiversity. An orphan from a young age, she becomes interested in the nature around her, especially the Laura Silva forest. Being judged by her choices and actions, this makes her fate much more unpredictable than what she would have wished for. Go back in time to the 19th century and unlock new content on each historical landmark. This is presented in Fragments of Laura through audio gossip and detailed motion comics, in a mix of non-fiction locations and characters, with a fictional story to bring all the pieces together. Visit Laura's pharmacy and uncover the secrets of Madeira's most famous and traditional drink. The experience includes an interactive scene where you are encouraged to find out about the most notable elements of Madeira's culture, as well as the nature behind it. Curious for more? To enrich the Fragments of Laura experience, the Havita website creates a bridge between each story point and several aspects directly related to Madeira's ecosystem and culture. This is presented in the style of a web documentary to create further discussion about each topic. Download our app and find out more information on our website.
The app is not there yet, but it's still a research project, but we hope to get there. This is a view of the web side. So there is the location base, which is accessible through the phone, and there is a website which features all of the interviews with the locals. Through the phone, after each animation that is a part of the fictional story, you can also access interviews and expression of the local culture from the locals. But you can always go back to the website later at home and go in depth in the content. On the right side, there is also a call for participation where viewers can send new stories or ask for particular clarifications or topics they would like to know about, or even just comment on the platform itself. This was an example of how the fiction and the interviews work together. The bish-bish is an endemic species of bird and is explained by the local biologist. There's no audio, she's speaking in Portuguese, so but she's explaining about the bird, where it can be found and why and how it's endangered. On the mobile phone, looking at the Laura side, here is a piece of her story that highlights the bish-bish.
Oh my, what are you doing here, little guy?
What kind of bird it is? I never see it before.
They call it bish-bish, but they are usually found in the forests, not downtown. It looks like he's wounded. Help me here, Clementina. Let's take him inside.
Uh-oh, you will get us into trouble again.
So the fictional character is supposed also to generate empathy, and sort of her adventure and misadventures will carry you through the different plot points. Each of one had a specific issue that is highlighted, like here's the bish-bish. After finishing both the story and the platform, drafting the platform, we went back to the field and did a series of studies with local communities and tourists to see and understand how they perceive the platform and how can we improve it and make it really work. Local community members from a local village participated, local experts as biologists and tourist operator. And what was interesting for us, and it was highlighted from the studies, is that the locals did appreciate very much the participatory feature, and they thought that this would be something they would like to do. They would like to advertise activities that are present in the island out of their pride of their cultures, but mainly highlight activities they would like to lead and invite tourists to participate. This was the interface designed together with one of the locals, Arsenia, who would like to give a workshop on culinary traditional dishes of Madeira and invite tourists to come and do it with her. Expert scientists and also tour operators highlighted how they would like to have tourists joining them in activities like crowdsourcing the census of certain endangered animals like the Madeiran falcon, or replanting trees. Sorry, this was the previous slide. Replanting trees after the forest, which are activities usually for the locals, but could be enhanced by participation of tourists as well. We also tried the interface and the Avita platform with tourists in the wild. We went to hotels. It's very difficult to catch tourists on the holidays. They did not want to stop and answer our questions, but we managed to interact with 7 in depth. And they liked very much the idea of having this information, the authenticity of the information, which they would not get from the tourist agents, and especially some of the elements of explaining the geology, natural disaster of the island made them empathize with the locals, because the tourist agent usually don't disclose that kind of information, because they're afraid the tourists will run away. And we discovered that actually it makes them feel closer to the population. But in a way, the project is multifaceted. We are evaluating different aspects of it. The storytelling and creativity is the sheer power of storytelling. Is narrative persuasion working? Are people actually empathizing with Laura and hence taking on board the local values? The impact on the local context, is it happening? Are people connecting with locals and meeting up? And behavior and attitude change. Would these tourists then have learned something and take it with them in the next trips? This will be validated with longitudinal studies. There are publications on this work and at the Interactive Storytelling Conference, CogSci Interact, but I would just like to thank you for listening. My time is up, and we're trying to bring LoRa to other islands that need visibility on some of their issues. Thank you.
Brilliant. Hi, I'm Brian McGurko, and I'm from Georgia Tech, like Gil. And as David mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing with dance, and a little bit more broadly about improvisation and embodiment. So at my lab, the Expressive Machinery Lab at Tech, one of the key questions I'm interested in is how can we improvise with computers? Especially in these really open-ended and ill-defined domains where the number of actions is practically infinite, like how much you can move your body around, and ill-defined in terms of the goals being overwhelmingly unclear, aside from perform well. So I'm going to show a few examples of some of the work that we're doing that tries to address this, and talk a little bit briefly about the kinds of knowledge that we bring to bear in AI systems that try to improvise with us.
The Expressive Machinery Lab is exploring how we can use our understanding of human creativity to build AI that can collaborate with us and create things with us. Lumini is a collaborative, interactive installation in which a human participant can creatively improvise movement together with an AI dance partner. The human's virtual shadow is projected onto a screen next to an AI avatar, and in the liminal space of the screen, the two can dance together. Lumini uses 3 different types of knowledge to improvise about movements. Domain knowledge allows the agent to reason about gestures using similar techniques to those a dancer would use. We have built a machine learning pipeline that is able to cluster gestures based on their visual similarity. This capability allows the agent to learn movement patterns and recognize movements it has seen before. The agent also uses elements of viewpoints movement theory to reason about movements. Viewpoints is a framework for understanding movement in theater and dance. Lumini uses several parameters from viewpoints to reason about movement. These include energy, tempo, and size. We are also currently incorporating features from another movement theory, Laban movement analysis, as a way of better understanding gestures in terms of their spatial qualities. We are exploring Laban's theory of spatial geometry in both physical and virtual space in order to characterize and generate gestures according to their spatial orientations. We also equip the agent with a gesture memory and the ability to learn from users. This allows the agent to continuously add to its knowledge base and draw from prior experience when responding to users. Finally, the agent uses procedural knowledge of improvisation strategies in order to decide how to respond to a gesture. The agent uses several different strategies to respond to a user's movement. These include mimicry of the movement, transformation of the movement, recalling a similar or complementary movement from memory in terms of viewpoints dimensions, and applying action-response patterns that the agent has learned by dancing with its human partner. We have also developed a set of tools for customizing the agent's improvisation strategies depending on the situation. For instance, the user can specify that the agent should respond with 3 gestures in sequence, using different strategies for each gesture. The result is a playful, co-creative experience in which humans and AI agents can dance together, either in the wild or in a performance setting. These social, collaborative interactions between humans and machines can help us to more generally understand how we can improvise with computers in creative domains as we interact in the arts, at home, and in the workplace.
So this project called Lumini, like Lumen and then AI at the end of it, really is about how do we tackle this big problem of free-flowing movement using lifelong learning. And one of the key questions that we've had to ask is, like, what are these kinds of knowledge that we bring to bear? And it was alluded to in this video. Oh, there we go. It was alluded to in this video. There's really three kinds of knowledge that Lumini uses. The first is interactional. So procedural knowledge about how to communicate and interact. For example, turn-taking, which is something that happens commonly in human dialogue. It also happens in improvisational performance. These kids are not doing very well, obviously. There's tacit knowledge. So in other words, the domain-specific knowledge. This is an example from Laban. The details aren't important, but what you see here is a formal representation from a movement theorist, from a choreographer, about how people use their bodies on stage and the ways to describe it. So this can be something, whether it's in movement or in jazz or in improvisational theater, this is really the knowledge that those practitioners are building up through rehearsal and through study of their craft. It can also come from cognitive studies. We've done work on studying pretend play, for example, as a way to try to understand how novices create stories together. While there is no handbook that we all have to learn how to pretend with dolls and toys with each other, we can still do it. So that's the kind of domain that we opt for doing studies of social creativity as a way to inform computational systems. And then finally, there's the episodic knowledge. So like we said, it's a lifelong learning process. So this agent that learns how to dance with us is not encoded with predetermined dance moves. We don't give it a bunch beforehand. We put this out in an empty space, or ideally with people, in a museum, in a gallery, where have you. And it learns how to dance by dancing with people. It segments the inputs that are coming in. It goes, okay, that was one move. Okay, I know that part of the vocabulary, and onward and onward. And as it does this, it's building up this huge set of things that it's experienced with people. And it can use the tacit knowledge and the procedural improvisation knowledge, the interactional knowledge, as ways to transform and make new kinds of moves and new gestures to dance with a human. So this tells us kind of how to generate outputs. So if I have a bunch of examples, if I know improv moves, like how to take turns with somebody who's dancing, how to do call and response, how to do imitation, that doesn't necessarily tell me how to do it well. Like I have 1,000 candidates of moves generated, perhaps. How do I pick a good one? So in follow-up work to this sort of notion of embodied improvisation, we've looked at this question of creativity heuristics, which is really the fourth kind of knowledge. And this is a procedural representation that we use to different effects to understand, yeah, that's creative, and yeah, that's not. And it seems to psychologically break down into notions of surprise, how surprising a thing is, how novel that thing is, and the quality of that thing, which is highly domain dependent. So in the work I'm going to show you now, I'll show you a quick video that explains the domain, and then a little bit of a hint about how we do this kind of reasoning with creativity heuristics in an embodied improvisational experience. Maybe you have to click. It was? You can see it? Oh, you can see it down there. Oh, sorry.
We have chosen to study improvisational action selection within the props game from improv theater, where people take turns with an abstract prop to perform actions using that prop as a real or fictional object for comedic effect. We have created an interactive installation using virtual reality for people to play the props game as robots with a virtual improviser agent. After familiarizing themselves with the game in a trial round, during their turn, the human is given a prop and has 30 seconds to perform as many pretend actions using that prop as possible. After completing each action, they hit a buzzer, incrementing their score before passing the prop to the agent when their time is up. When the agent receives the prop, it improvises actions using the same prop for 30 seconds, incrementing its score after each action is completed. In order to better interpret the agent's actions, the intended action and object are announced using a speech bubble and audio. When the agent completes its turn, the round ends, and a new prop is given to the human for their next round. The game ends after a fixed number of rounds are complete. All of the agent's improvisational responses are generated using the carnival architecture.
So that's the environment where you're playing pretend with objects and trying to do something creative with them to train the robot, who then does the same kind of thing with objects it's never seen before based on its affordances. This will quickly highlight sort of the creativity heuristics, and we'll wrap it up. All right, I clearly don't know how to use. There we go. Okay.
Human improvisation generates real-time, collaborative, creative responses to highly open-ended situations in various domains, ranging from jazz to emergency response coordination to organizational management to improv theater. Improvisation has thus been the focus of research into co-creative computational agents. In contrast to previous work in this space, our research focuses on addressing improvisational action selection, which is the challenge of selecting a relevant action from a vast action space without a clear set of goals or objective functions to use for selecting from those actions. We propose that improvisational agents can be intrinsically motivated to negotiate creative arcs and select actions accordingly over the course of the improvised performance. Creative arcs are trajectories of actions taken by the agent in a creative space of novelty, surprise, and value, computationally measured from the agent's perspective. Therefore, given a creative arc to follow, over time an agent would choose actions across the action space to follow that arc as closely as possible.
So, for example, an agent can do things really not surprising and really not novel and really not quality and turn it up across the experience to give some sense of narrative or creative flow with the interactions. And that's something that can be authored a priori. So that's it. I'm out of time, and thank you all.
That was fun. So that's some of the stuff that's happening, and you can expect a lot more. I have some questions for the group, and here, this first one is for both Gil and Brian. So we have the avatar or the computer, the AI part. Is that serving as a stimulus for the human to get ideas from that, or is it that the two are on equal footing, they both have to adapt to each other, and whichever the case may be, well, assuming it's the latter where they're both adapting to each other, what extra do humans have that we don't yet find in the interactions between these? So that's you guys, take that in.
This gives me an opportunity to talk about soul. Because there is this question of, do robots have soul? And there may be multiple answers for that. One of them is they could have. There's no reason that a 3-pound lamp that only obeys the rule of law and some randomness in the quantum level gives rise to self and consciousness and soul. So there's no reason that maybe not in 5 or 50 or 5,000 or 5 million years our robots will develop soul. But for now, the promise of the kind of works that I'm doing is that the robots will bring what they're good at, and humans will bring what they're good at. And what extra do humans have? Humans still have this je ne sais quoi emotions and expressions and expressivity that robots don't have. Robots have the ability to have absolute memory. They can bring like a motif for 10 minutes ago, reverse it and do some modification and play just as it was played. They have virtuosities at 20 hertz per second, for example. And by the way, with the 2 sticks, I didn't mention that. One can play 20 hertz, one can play 19 hertz. So you have polyrhythm that are really crazy. And they have the algorithms that humans don't have. I don't think about genetic algorithms. So the promise is that I, as a human, will bring my expression, emotions, and all of the good stuff, and they will bring the memory and virtuosity and the ability to think differently. And together there will be a spark that will create new music that will inspire me not only to play differently, I would play with humans, and I do when I play with my robots, but also think about music in a completely new way, which is starting slowly with every new robot. So that's what's extra.
So we've actually done a little bit of study on one of our agents asking some of these questions. We have a collaborative sketching agent called the Drawing Apprentice that creates abstract and representational drawings with people. And one of the things that we found is that novices in particular really like it for ideation and for helping them feel comfortable in a domain that they're not really comfortable in, right? So novices having this creative companion along with them, they found to be really helpful for just doing anything, really, and it felt like it helped push them to getting something actually completed. Artists were much more, like professional artists or designers, were much more interested in it just helping them come up with new ideas. So for ideation only. But they found the lack of control over it to be a little frustrating. So I think that some of this, really depends on the context that you're talking about using this and who is using it. And also just to add an answer to one of the questions that you have in here, in terms of what extra do humans have, we're the gold standard of this, right? I mean, it's actually pretty funny. When we talk about building these improv or these computational creative programs, we don't talk about just letting them go do their thing. We want them to go do their thing so that we like it, right? The AI might be totally fine with whatever garbage it's made, and that's like the war and peace of its generation. But we don't like it, and so we kill the code and we write something new. So we are what we're shooting for in some extent, or at the very least, our perception of what is quality is what we're shooting for, which is why I feel like it's really necessary in developing these systems to understand a bit better about what kind of heuristic decisions and why we appreciate some things over others as individuals and societally.
Question for Valentina. Okay, so you have this device, you walk around, it tells you something about the area, it's going to change your perception, it gives you a task, an organizing principle, makes you more curious, you now probe at it. So that looks like interactive education outside the classroom. So is it art or is it interactive education? It looks like some of Mickey's stuff is very interactive.
Okay, thanks for the question. This is actually where, as an artist, I don't put things in a box before making it. I usually do something and then find the framework where it might fit. But there are artistic aspects to this work, which is definitely the storytelling and all of the aesthetics that goes with the visualization and plotting and making an emotional journey for our audiences to go through. Otherwise, what kind of story design would that be? But at the same time, there is an educational or a message that we want to get through. And this is where we also appeal to the narrative persuasion framework, where through the narrative, the story, which I think it's an art form, we do want to change or influence people. And so in that sense, there is an educational aspect to it. And we have actually, in the group, there is a researcher doing exactly that. She's adapting an entertainment education framework to this specific type of work, and transmedia for change, where she's taking the target audience sort of motivation, which in this case is the tourists, which have a very specific motivation to come to a destination, and the social context and what is important, what are the values of the locals, and inserting them in an artistic work, which is the storytelling. So I think it's a combination of both. And even today, we're doing some work with museums, and people want entertainment, especially young audiences, and curators are pushing for education. But why should these two things be distinguished?
Great. I think it's going to be great education myself. So this again is for you, Valentina, please. Looks like the way of the future, right? Better tourism. So how prevalent do you think this is going to be? And what's the next stage of development that you see happening for this? And by the way, if you have some questions, please write them down, put them to the side. We have people allegedly who will collect them. We're going to sort them, and then we're going to have a phase where we answer your question. They answer your question.
Okay. So how prevalent is this going to be? We have an over tourism problem in Europe, and I think that this kind of entertainment education framework is going to be adopted more and more. There are already out there transmedia storytelling for tourism. It blends the marketing with the participation and engagement of the audience and sensitivization to the local issues. So it is going to be something that the tourist board are going to ask. We have already some requests from the Tourism Board of Portugal to expand this model to other areas, not only Madeira, but other areas of Portugal. And what is the next stage of development? The next stage, I think we already have it. We just don't have all of the rules. We have mobile VR now with the Google Cardboard that it's becoming a part of our daily ways of absorbing news. For example, many newspapers have the 360 VR piece embedded in their offerings, and augmented reality. Augmented reality is here to stay, and we have the new Google API that is open for development. We are just have to understand how to overlay information without really overflowing or overdoing it. But I think that's the way.
That's great. I mean, I certainly see that this is a way of managing tourists, allowing tourists to collaborate. It's going to be a huge market there. Gil and Brian, please. Excuse me. So is it more realistic to think that the AI is producing idea germs or full ideas?
I think for me, it's more about the germs because it's about the human-robot collaboration. So yes, we did have a non-interactive composition, the one that I showed in the video, where we analyzed and you just press a button and then the robot plays. It was nice effort, but when I really get excited is where I build on the ideas that I listen in real time, hopefully being surprised and inspired. So, you know, you can take this germ of idea and just play it by itself and it will be a full idea, and whether you like it or not, that's some tests that we're doing. Actually, we are doing a lot of Turing tests. Our work is funded by the National Science Foundation, so we have to show that we do science. So we are having all kind of listening tests that compare between our improvisation and human improvisation, and we're getting better. But for me, it's more about the creativity in real time. Thinking about new ideas in real time and being inspired by them, and I treat it more as a germ that I can build on and create something new. And hopefully the robot will listen to my idea or a germ of idea and then come back and something amazing will happen.
I mean, almost the exact same answer, Art. Yeah, what he said. The systems that we develop are fairly reactive, and they're real time. Like Gil said, they're improvisational in nature, so it's very much about the moment rather than really the full product. If like to work on full ideas, I would probably move away from improvisation and look at things that can be more reflective, things that can be done iteratively with a person, like an agent that helps you write a story, for example, as opposed to an agent that's on stage with you or a robot that's on stage with you improvising theater. You know, one is much more reactive. The bar is much lower, whereas the other is much more deliberate and compositional.
For everybody. So I tried to press this view, that there are three aspects that you could plot any of your products along. The thing to think about is that sometimes you want to ask about the designer, where the creativity is. Is it in the designer? How much creativity is in the AI or in the collaborator, in the collaboration, or in the audience, as in the case of Valentina's stuff. So if you were to plot how much of the creativity is coming out of techniques for generating ideas, how much would you put there? how much would you put in embodied interaction like whittling, or how much would you say there is their deep understanding and working on it?
So yeah, I do. So that metaphor of whittling that you used earlier made me think a lot about work that we've done in participatory sense making, which is very much about engaging as a group with the material in front of you. I want to play pretend with you. I'm like, hey, maybe this is a good rocket ship. Ah, it's got water in it, but that's a bad rocket ship. Maybe I can. And I'm like touching with my hands and coordinating with you. So a lot of the stuff in that real-time kind of idea that we're looking at is much, much more about that whittling or the sense making as socially. I can understand choreography being much more down on a well-defined search though, because it's much more of that editing or compositional process, right? I don't know if you guys.
Okay.
I'll just keep. Okay.
Right. Okay, so yeah, this is an interesting diagram. Our conversations also we had previously, I think that for what concern the work I presented, it kind of breaks the creativity into what let's say the designer or story designer or storyteller can do, which is quite well defined in the x-axis, quite forward. We have techniques for stories and editing, etc. But for what concerns the audience and the way that we want to influence and have the audience participating, then we're moving towards the embedded interaction. The audience needs to interact with the local context, with the space, and with the story that we give them in order to reframe their thinking and rethink what the ideas they came with. So that, I don't know if that was clear, but I tried.
So I don't have a particular coordinate there. I'll try to own the whole space, but I do want to say something about embodied interaction. Originally, the question of why robots for me was because I wrote some software back then when I did write my own software that listened to my MIDI piano and improvised as a grad student. And what was missing for me was acoustic sound. No matter how good your stereo system is, when you play with symbolic digital MIDI music, there's no richness. And I thought, what could do all of these algorithms? What could create new ideas but have acoustic sound? And the answer was robots, and that's why I went into robotics when I came to Georgia Tech. But then there were multiple other reasons related to embodied interactions that got to be very exciting to me. One of them is the whole idea of visual cues. We have studies on anticipation and coordination. When the robot is lifting his arm higher, you know it's going to be a loud sound, and you can synchronize your music when you play with a robot better than with a computer screen, even if you have some animation on the computer screen. But embodiment is something that we've been focusing in the last 2 years more and more. One example that I give when I'm talking about embodiment is I will never come up with an idea, a musical idea, when I improvise that requires 11 fingers. Because embodied cognition will tell us, and I know not everyone sign on embodied cognition and multiple definitions, but the mind and body are not separate, they're all together, and what I perceive is based on my body and the physical understanding of the surrounding, so I will never come up with an idea that I cannot produce. And for the robot, it was very interesting. Some of the work of Mason Breton was, how do you path plan? And he used, for the computer scientist, Viterbi algorithm path planning. Because you can have a musical idea, but the robot, even though it has amazing abilities, it has 8 arms, and each arm can play so fast. But some things that I, as a human, as a marimba player, can do, very simple, the robot cannot, because the arms will collide with each other. Each one of the arms actually cover more than one key on the marimba, so you cannot play a chromatic scale fast. So you have to come up with a musical idea and do the calculation of what can be done, and then find some kind of giving up some of your ideas because of the embodied interaction. And for me, this is an area that is really interesting, teaching us how we play music, how our mind and body as humans interact when we're coming up with new ideas.
Yeah, so just before we leave this, there's another question, but an advertisement for some of this idea is that although we've talked a lot about creativity, it always seems to be creativity primarily in the head. But of course, you never see an artist not creative without the device or the artifact that they're using. Or a musician, in spite of, even Beethoven, when he was deaf, still composed on the piano. Now, why would that be? So we aren't really accounting for the distributed or emergent nature of the creativity unless we incorporate the person engaging the artifacts around them. And I think we should consider the different ways in which where creation lives. So I spent some time with a jazz musician just before coming here, and this was his question, so of course it seems to be quite prominent. The way I would put it is, as Wittgenstein would say, we all have a form of life, humans share a form of life, but the AI doesn't share the human form of life. It is, if a form of life at all, it is a non-human form of life. Now, we could have an AI system come up with some food, and there could be some principles for good food, but you might think before you get great food, you're going to have to be able to taste like a human. So don't you need to have human sensibility for real engagement in the case of improvisational music or jazz or any of these other things, or even in the case of the narrative structure, if that's ever going to be made by an agent?
Well, I have a pithy answer, which is, well, if you just have enough examples, then yes. You could, if you have enough soulful examples or examples of soulful food, you can just throw it at deep learning, right? That's what everybody does. But this is why I think that it's kind of interesting to look at the notion of procedural information. So as opposed to just declarative bottom-up knowledge that novices think about things like there's this move, there's this move, there's this move. The higher level that we can represent knowledge, the easier it is to encapsulate lots and lots and lots and lots of different parts of the action space. Have we moved away from the soul question, though? Because that's great, if so. Oh, we're still asking? All right.
You can if you like.
Okay, well, I would say that the problem isn't whether or not AI can contribute soulful things. They definitely can. We just don't have the detector to detect the examples to train it on. So all we really need is a soul detector, and then clearly we would be able to do it.
So the question is whether it's soulful or is it perceived as soulful? And I think we can definitely get to a point in it's perceived as soulful, and to prove that it really has a soul, can I prove that I really have a soul and free will and all the good stuff? And that's probably not my goal right now. The goal is to have people being affected by the music and feel that this entity has ideas that are expressive and emotional, and if you want to use the S word, as long as you enjoy it and inspired by it, I can use the S word.
Great. Do you want to say something, Valentina? Yes. Please.
Just I haven't done a lot of AI, but I do have a fascination for discovering what can AI do to stories or with stories, and in that way, yes, we do need to find the soul of the AI in order to maintain the emotion and the subtleties that the storytellers need to have. So I think we are getting there in games. We already have some of those AI engine developing, adapting stories, changing the plot in real time. But I think that still there is still some road to do in that sense.
Yeah, I guess the plea for soul, it's not literal, of course, but it is the thing that distinguishes the pedestrian from the special. And you hear it often when the two musicians are completely elevating the game. So I'm not just taking a position one way or another, but I do think that you can't talk to people who are playing jazz music without them wanting to ask this question. Now, I was rather hoping that there would be some mechanism for collecting questions. I can see there is a torrent of questions in paper, but oh, what, low, and have they been sorted or no? No, all right. Well, okay, here's one. what are the similarities or differences between the nature of interest in story narrative and dance narrative? So story narrative has got a certain kind of structure. Dance narrative, I'm with people who work in contemporary. The idea of narrative is so far.
So so we talk about in Lumini, we talk about that as a a term I think I just made up, a proto-narrative. So narrative at its core means causally related events over time. And with story, there's a lot more that goes along with that. And with dance, it's far, far, far less specific in terms of sort of the flow. It is a creative arc, like the work I was talking about earlier, but it doesn't have necessarily a story arc or characters or dramatic tension, maybe even, though it could. So I would say that narrative in dance is far more abstract, I guess.
Yeah, I was just going to compare with painting. I would say that the story narrative is like a figurative painting where you could actually visualize the character and follow them and see the changes in their attitude. With dance, there is a narrative, but yeah, it's very abstract and is very aesthetics, and it goes beyond the sort of a time structure that binds a narrative, a story narrative together.
Okay, here's an interesting question about the limits of definition, I would guess. How do you decide what counts as atypical but artistic and what counts as atypical but weird and not artistic?
So when talking about those creativity heuristics, one of them is, like, two of them are actually related to like surprise and novelty. And there's slight differences between them we don't have to get into, but things that are just surprising or novel may not necessarily be interesting or artistic. There are domain-specific quality metrics that are the magic sauce for a lot of this, and that's really probably the least understood component of all of this work is what's the control knowledge for how do we decide what's good? Both as producers or as like observers, and I don't have a hard and fast answer for that.
Yeah. So in the context of the Becoming case, it's the dancers themselves that everything is weird. That thing is, I mean, that's all it does is produce weird stuff, and so it's the artist, the dancer, who decides that's an appropriatable idea germ. And then they convert it into something that's useful. So it's there entirely for stimulation. The challenge is when it's not for stimulation, but the system is like collaborating with you, so it is producing something. I know in a lot of jazz, though, the case is the weirder the thing, the more it invites the person on the other side to make some useful response to that thing that was, if done by a person, would be counted as an error, or if done by the machine, it's just counted as, that's non-standard. I've got to do something in reply.
So there are two questions. First is it art? And secondly, is it good art? And whether it's art or not, that's, like Nelson Goodman said, it's not what is art, it's where is art and when is art. If it's presented in a museum, it will be art because the whole space and the whole sociology of the art world said it's art. Now go and figure out if it's a good art or bad art, and that's basically, again, whether people like it and they think it's good. Talk about weird, look, most of the art today is weird. People will not be noticed if they don't do something that pushes the envelope. So I think it's not so much about user studies or trying to evaluate with a focus group if it's good or not good, if it's art or not art. You just throw it into the world and see what the world says. And if the world likes it, it's art, and good one.
Okay, here's one for you, Valentina. It says, this sounds like a great project. I'm wondering if you are also looking at the characteristics of problematic tourists so that you can reach them specifically as opposed to only the interested tourists who are perhaps quite respectful already. In other words, how are you going to make sure that this intervention can be successful?
Yes, we are looking at actually, yeah, a portion of tourists, but they're not all respectful because we do notice in Madeira that some of these tourists are not aware of how to well, appreciate the nature, the biodiversity, or the local sort of tradition and culture. So the way to reach these tourists is, in a way, still beyond the research question at the moment, with merging the framework of entertainment with change. But we do have to appeal to the tourism board to advertise. It's almost a marketing problem. How do we make sure that people and all kinds of people would know about it? But I think it's also a policy problem, something that the policymaker will need to embrace, this kind of education of tourists to respect and to embrace the local issues. So what we're doing now is to involve as many stakeholders as possible in presenting the idea and collecting their input, their suggestions, because this is a way to make sure that we include their motivations and their needs in the offering that we have. So for the moment, we are making this focus group with the different type of target audience. And then we probably will need to market this in a specific way. Thank you. Yeah.
How does a robot know when to stop? So the human stops composing a piece when she's expressed herself, when the musical piece is finished, or the dance piece. How does a robot know when it's done?
Actually, we have a paper in which we explore the same question. There are some things that are easy. Improvisation is usually in a structure. So if you listen to jazz, you have the head, then you have improv, 12 bars, and then someone else is improvising for 12 bars, and then you have the head again, and the piece is done. In free jazz, it's more open, but still there's structure, level of energy. You go very energetic, do whatever you want, but make it high energy versus low energy, and so on. We try to have our robots doing more interesting things than just trading four. Trading four is one of the most common way to play, improvise in a group in jazz. You play 4 bars, and someone is building on what you play, play another 4 bars, and trading back and forth. We have a paper where highly actually have a whole rule system to decide when to introduce new ideas, when to interrupt you in real time, when to just let you go and see what else you have, because it didn't find anything that it decides to follow up. And it was basically rule. I assume that we can use machine learning. We're all moving more and more from rule-based system to database systems, and try to find a way to see how humans do it, how humans decide when to stop, how do humans decide in a free jazz improvisation who plays when and what. And I think, just like Brian said, machine learning can solve everything. I don't think so, but it can be a first step into answering this question.
Art is about expressing emotion and ideas. There's meaning and goals, there's personality. So I take it this question is about the larger construct of the integrity that goes behind a work of art, coherence, or the idea that the person is trying to follow on in their oeuvre, that they're building on something that is identifiably an artistic identity. So could someone talk a little further about what the prospects are for AI going further in this direction of the higher order construct, where it's really more about the content or the longer structure than just the forms at individual?
So there are very few examples I can think of that really serve that question better than a project called Aaron. Aaron was, and I wish I could, I'm sure many people in here remember his name. I cannot remember the author. There we go, thank you. And Aaron is a 30-plus year project. It was a passion project by a researcher on how to make an agent that could paint and make its own drawings. And Aaron's paintings have been all over the world. You can actually kind of recognize them stylistically as well. So it very much is a translation from the author to a program that then makes the things, and it's very much sort of an expression, a second order expression of the author. But Aaron is probably my favorite example that I can see of things that really sort of a collection of works from an AI, I think.
All right. Okay. You've talked about machines and how they can help generate new ideas and stuff, but how might machines help artists reflect and workshop their ideas? So dancers have the mirror to work against, but they'd like some higher order structures to reflectively, to add insight to their performance that they themselves may not get. It's an opportunity to have something better than music -1 from machines. It's something better that the machine is actually adding something reflectively to what the human is doing. What, you guys have anyone here have?
It's a good one, because one of the criticism is, why do you do it? Because you just can do it, but yes, it can be interesting, but how do you over time can reflect and see that what you did is really good and really pushed the envelope and really answered the goal that you were interested in? Is it new and valuable music in my case and other art in different cases? And I think I don't have an answer for this. And I think someone should come up with an answer for that. I just try to make music, and we do evaluations, user evaluation. Sometimes we actually do a more objective evaluation. For example, the path planning. Did the arm really move as little as it could with as little as energy as it could? So that's a good path planning. But that doesn't answer the big question of what is the value of what you do to society. I think I need more time for that.
I'll take reflection a little differently then. In terms of systems that provide or afford the artists more reflection, in other words, the point of the system is to help the artist reflect, which I think is what you were maybe getting at. There's a lot of really neat work in the narrative field looking at how to create intelligent authoring tools. So I'm sitting and writing a story, and a tool, if I tap on it, or even if I'm just sitting here, suggestions can kind of appear based on the semantics of the words that I'm using. Obviously a really hard problem though. So being able to do that at any kind of deep level is maybe even harder than the generation problem. But there's at least people are working on this in the narrative field. I don't know how familiar you are with that, or.
Well, yeah. I have to say that narrative tools, yes, there are quite a few. But what I'm seeing right now, or at least from my point of view, is this challenge of immersivity and empathy that is brought through VR and 360 immersive technologies. These are technologies more than AI, but I think as we combine more intelligence in these technologies, we are able to bring experiences to people, even in the people that are not there, that could not have that experience, and bring the experience of multiple point of views. The experience of not a single point of view is also what makes life so interesting. There are multiple takes on the same thing, and I think that 360 and VR are giving us that possibility. And we are discovering the language through studies and sort of experimentation with that.
So just briefly, this is maybe a good point for me to give my little spiel about will they take our jobs, because that's some of the criticism I get. Yes, we are okay with you taking blue-collar jobs, and yes, we understand some of the white-collar jobs. Radiologist is going to go first, so I hear, and lawyers may have less of the work they're currently doing. But music, how can you take music from us and give you and in the future, will it be only robotic bands? So my answer is, of course not, and I think I mentioned multiple times that at least the way I look at it is it's about humans and robots on stage, inspiring each other and leading to new music. But yes, someone else can take it and replace musicians. And Pat Metheny recently had a gig or a full show, or it's called Orchestrion, where he traveled with only robots and without humans. But here too, if we look at the history of music or art, every time there was an invention, and we talked about, I showed the Luddite before, but in music, the other picture in my slide was Berliner, who invented the vinyl. And it sounded better than Edison's coil, and people were thinking, there will be no more music. It sounds so good. Why would we go to see live musicians? We can just sit at home and listen to it. And of course, the vinyl just spread out music way more. And not only we can listen to music everywhere, it created genres that we don't have today. Hip hop, which is about 90% of the Billboard 100, Atlanta is big, trap, wouldn't have been developed the way developed without a vinyl that you can scratch. Look at the camera. When the camera came, everyone was concerned, hey, we don't need painting anymore because the camera is so realistic, it's amazing. But Expressionism, Impressionism probably wouldn't have been invented if it was for the camera, because artists were looking at other ways to represent the world that is not realistic. And not to mention that it creates so many jobs for photographers. I think there are more photographers making money today than painters. So I know that the kind of invention will just create new jobs that we cannot think about. I have the anecdotal example of Jason Barnes that wouldn't have a job without AI and without robotics. So I feel good about this going into the right direction.
Well, how nice to end on an optimistic note there. I hope you'll agree. We've had a pretty good run, and thank you for the excellent presentations and thoughts. I don't know if someone's going to call a formal close to the conference.
Well, with this, we'll formally close Cognitive Science 2019. On behalf of my colleagues, program co-chairs Colleen Seifert and Christian Frexa, thank you so much for coming here. Safe travels, and we'll see you in 2020 in Toronto. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You said in Toronto?